My neighbor Karen's voice cut through the quiet like a fire alarm, shrill and absolutely sure of itself. "You're a thief!" she shrieked, standing at the edge of my driveway with her phone up, live streaming to anyone who'd watch. There I was, wrench in hand, tightening a loose fixture on my outdoor shed, wondering how on earth checking a fuse box had turned me into the Bonnie and Clyde of suburban power lines. Before I could even process the latest accusation, 2 police cars screeched to a halt, sirens silenced but lights flashing, the kind of arrival you'd expect for a bank robbery, not an HOA spat. I caught my own reflection in the window, 29, sleep-deprived, and already regretting every decision that led me to buy a house across from Karen's. A camera-waving crowd had gathered faster than I thought possible, half the cul-de-sac lurking by mailboxes. I just stood there, equal parts mortified and fascinated, as Karen made her grand declaration. "This man is stealing electricity from the HOA grid. I have proof." I could practically see the clickbait headlines scrolling across her phone. The senior officer, a guy with an impressive mustache and a tired face, gave me a look that said he'd rather be anywhere else. His partner, fresh out of the academy and probably still optimistic about humanity, tried to corral Karen to the side, but she was already pointing to a tangle of cables behind my shed. "See that? Those wires are new. He installed them last weekend. He's bypassing the meter, leeching off community power." Karen's voice went up half an octave for every sentence. Her sidekick, a thin, nervous woman with a binder of HOA rules tucked under her arm, nodded with the kind of fervor reserved for true believers. "This is a felony," Karen whispered loudly, looking at the officers, then the camera, then back at me. The rookie cop followed the direction of Karen's finger, gaze falling on my perfectly legal, code-inspected outdoor outlet and a brand-new extension cord I'd bought for my power tools. "Mind if we take a look?" he asked. I shrugged, gestured grandly at the shed, and offered a silent prayer that this whole scene would at least make for a good story at the next block party. The cop ducked inside, flashlight cutting through the dim, and I heard him mutter about lawn equipment and cobwebs. Karen hovered over his shoulder, trying to peer inside, but the older officer gently blocked her path. The crowd grew. My neighbor Tim grinned at me from his porch, popcorn in hand. "Good show," he mouthed. I resisted the urge to bow. 5 minutes later, the rookie emerged, holding up the offending extension cord like it was Exhibit A in a high-profile trial. "Just power tools," he announced, glancing at his partner. Karen huffed, not deterred for a second. "He's hiding something," she insisted, voice quivering with the energy of a crusader who has never been wrong. "Check his meter. Check everything. That's what HOA dues are for, community oversight." I saw the senior cop's patience fray at the edges, but he nodded. "Ma'am, let's stay calm. We'll have a look." While the rookie fiddled with the meter box, original, factory-sealed, unbroken, Karen continued her broadcast, updating her followers on the power thief next door. The words came rapid-fire. "Flagrant abuse endangering the neighborhood, probably has illegal grow lights in there." I bit my tongue, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Inside, my brain played a highlight reel of the last 6 months. The endless violation notices, the over-the-fence lectures, the unsolicited advice about proper shrub trimming. Karen had always been a nuisance, but this was new territory. Now she wanted me branded a criminal. The rookie finished his inspection and shrugged at his partner. "Nothing unusual. Everything checks out." But Karen was relentless. "Call the city. Call the utility company. You can't let him get away with this." That's when things got really weird. As the police tried to wrap up, the senior officer's radio crackled, and he listened intently before glancing at Karen. "The utility company says there's been a spike in usage on this block, but not at this address. In fact, his usage is lower than average." Karen's face twisted in confusion, then determination. "He must have hidden it. He's smart. He knows how to cover his tracks." She leaned in, lowering her voice as if sharing a state secret. "Follow the wires. He's rerouted them underground, maybe even spliced into another house's supply. You have to check. The officers exchanged glances. The rookie, perhaps sensing an opportunity to learn something new or maybe just desperate to avoid paperwork, agreed to walk the property lines. Karen led the way, trailed by her binder-wielding deputy. I followed, keeping my mouth shut, resisting every urge to poke holes in her logic. We circled my house, the officers taking notes, Karen snapping photos of every wire, junction box, and garden gnome within 10 feet of an outlet. The whole time, the crowd murmured, divided between Team Karen and Team Reasonable Adult. Then, in what can only be described as an act of divine comedy, the rookie stopped at Karen's side yard, squinting at a knot of wires draped over her fence. He pointed. "What's this?" Karen's confidence faltered for a split second. "That's my garden lighting. Totally legal." But the wires looked old, patched with electrical tape, running from her box through a crude hole in the fence and, wait for it, vanishing underground, right toward the shared transformer. The rookie traced the line, curiosity sharpening. He knelt, tugged gently, and the wire pulled free, trailing like a stubborn weed. At the end, a jerry-rigged splitter. The officer raised his eyebrows, glancing at the senior cop. Karen stammered, her phone abruptly lowering as she realized everyone was watching her now. The officers consulted, and the rookie pulled out his phone, calling the utility company's emergency line. Within minutes, a technician in a rumpled uniform arrived, looking at the setup with barely concealed amusement. "Well, that's interesting," he said, kneeling by the transformer. "Someone's been bypassing the meter. But not at your house, sir." He nodded toward me. "This feed's tapped right here, on this side." He pointed at Karen's fence, then up to her attic window, where more wires snaked out like overgrown ivy. The silence was deafening. Karen's deputy shrank into her binder. Karen's mouth opened and closed. The crowd had a new show to watch. The technician explained, for the benefit of the audience and the police, how someone had patched directly into the community supply, siphoning off power for months, maybe years. Karen started to protest, voice trembling, but the words fell flat. This was no longer her performance. The spotlight had shifted, and for the first time since I moved in, I felt a strange sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the story was finally about to turn in my favor. A thick, stunned silence fell over the street, as if the entire neighborhood had suddenly been vacuum-sealed. Karen's livestream was still going, her phone hanging awkwardly in her hand while the screen captured her pale, tight-lipped face. She blinked, uncertain, as the utility technician traced his gloved finger along the patched wire leading from her attic window down to the fence. He kept his tone professional, but I saw the corners of his mouth twitch, fighting back a smirk. "See, right here," he said, gesturing so the officers and the crowd could all see, "this isn't just garden lighting. Whoever did this spliced into the grid before it reached the meter, classic power theft technique. You can even see the makeshift insulation." Karen's deputy, the woman with the overstuffed HOA binder, tried to muster a defense. "Surely there's some mistake. Karen, you had that landscaping done last year, didn't you? Maybe the workers." Her voice faded as the utility guy unscrewed the weatherproof cover and held up the bare, corroded copper. The rookie officer snapped a few photos, all business now, while the senior cop jotted something in his pad. "Ma'am, can you explain how these wires connect directly to your property?" the senior officer asked, almost gently. For a moment I actually felt a shred of sympathy for Karen. Her face was a storm cloud, every muscle fighting to hold composure. She straightened her shoulders and cleared her throat, voice low and brittle. "This is some sort of setup," she declared, pitching her words to the gathering crowd. "This is retaliation because I reported him. He's clever, he probably tampered with my wiring when I wasn't home. Anyone could have done this." It was a predictable play, but Karen's talent wasn't in originality. It was in sheer, bulldozing confidence. She scanned the faces around her, looking for the spark of support she usually found so easily. but something had shifted. My neighbor Tim, always quick with a wisecrack, shook his head in disbelief. Mrs. Ellsworth, 3 houses down and usually Karen's loyal supporter, looked at her shoes. Even the deputy seemed to shrink, her faith in Karen wavering. The senior officer turned to me, measured, almost apologetic. "Do you have any security cameras on your property?" he asked. I nodded and led the group back toward my porch, my shoes crunching over gravel. "There's 1 on the shed and 2 on the garage," motion activated. "They've got a good angle on both yards." As I pulled up the footage on my phone, the crowd leaned in, curiosity overwhelming whatever embarrassment they might have felt about this public spectacle. I scrolled back a week, then 2. There it was, a time-stamped clip showing a pair of men in generic uniforms, no company name visible, carrying coils of wire, their truck parked in front of Karen's house. Karen herself appeared in the background, arms folded, lips pursed, gesturing toward the fence. One man fed wire through the attic vent while the other ran it down the fence line. It was all right there in black and white, Karen's unmistakable silhouette orchestrating the installation. The rookie officer watched with growing amazement. "That's pretty conclusive," he muttered, nudging the senior cop. Karen tried to protest, claiming the footage could have been doctored, but her voice faltered. The technician was already on the phone with his supervisor, explaining what he'd found. "Yes, a direct bypass," he said. "It looks intentional, months old, maybe more." Karen snapped, her composure finally breaking. "This is a setup," she barked, voice sharp as glass. "It's harassment and I'll sue every one of you. I have rights." The words landed flat. The rookie officer, maybe sensing that patience had run out, calmly asked her to step aside while they finished their investigation. She stood rooted, hands balled into fists, chest heaving. As the officers conferred and the technician made diagrams of the illegal connection, Karen's deputy tried again to salvage the situation. "Maybe it's a misunderstanding," she pleaded. "A mistake from the previous owner? Or maybe the installers thought it was legal." The technician shook his head, his voice professional but firm. "Ma'am, this isn't something done by mistake. You'd have to deliberately run wire through an attic vent, patch into a live line, and route it to avoid the meter. That's not a landscaper's error." I leaned against my porch rail, feeling the tension drain from my shoulders. It was almost surreal. Months of petty notices, sudden fines, midnight letters from the HOA, all finally tipping back in my favor. But I wasn't naive enough to think Karen would go quietly. Her pride was a force of nature, and she was already scanning for an angle, a way to reassert control. The police officers explained that, due to the evidence and the nature of the violation, they'd have to file an official report and submit everything to both the city and the power company. There would be a hearing. Fines at the very least. Potential criminal charges, depending on the investigation. Karen's face paled, but she doubled down, insisting on a full sweep of the block. "If you check everyone's houses, I bet you'll find even more theft. He's probably coaching people how to do it." Tim laughed, unable to help himself, and the spell broke. The crowd thinned as people realized the drama was winding down. The rookie officer took my statement, asking polite questions about my history with Karen, how often she'd accused me, whether I'd had any issues with my own electric bill. I answered everything honestly, sarcasm bubbling just below the surface. When the senior officer asked if I wanted to file a harassment complaint, I paused, then said, "Let's see how this plays out first. I'd rather not be the one who drags the HOA through more legal drama, unless I have to." As the officers packed up, the technician lingered, nodding to me. "Keep an eye out. People like her don't let things go." He handed me a card, direct line to the utility company's fraud unit. Just in case. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the streetlights flicker on. My phone buzzed with a text from Tim. "Legendary performance. Next time you need a character witness, let me know." I let out a genuine laugh for the first time in weeks. My world had been upside down since Karen decided I was her personal nemesis, But now, for once, I felt the balance shift. Karen, though, wasn't finished. The next morning, I found a new notice in my mailbox, handwritten on HOA letterhead. Due to ongoing investigations, you are forbidden from using any exterior power outlets until further notice. Failure to comply will result in daily fines. The signature at the bottom, Karen, HOA chairwoman, was underlined 3 times. I stared at the note, incredulous. No official stamp, no vote, just pure, undiluted Karen. I brought the letter inside, snapping a photo to send to the officers and my lawyer, just in case. For the first time, I allowed myself a smug little grin. Karen might have started this war, but she had just handed me ammunition for the next round. I realized then that her greatest fear wasn't exposure or even punishment, it was losing control of the narrative. That, more than electricity or HOA dues or petty revenge, was what kept her up at night. As I sipped my coffee and listened to the quiet hum of my, fully legal, refrigerator, I wondered what she'd try next. I had a feeling the drama was only just getting started. The next few days felt like living inside a pressure cooker with a slow-building hiss, one you barely notice until the steam bursts. News of Karen's wiring debacle spread down the street faster than a summer thunderstorm. By the afternoon after the cops left, the local group chat was lit up with speculation and giddy schadenfreude. Someone shared a blurry video clip of Karen's power thief meltdown, and I saw my own expression, a mix of resigned amusement and disbelief, immortalized as a meme, when you get accused of stealing electricity but end up busting your accuser. My phone buzzed constantly with messages. Some offered support, others just wanted the play-by-play. For the first time, people who'd always kept their heads down around Karen were opening up, swapping horror stories about her leadership of the HOA. But while the neighborhood's mood lifted, Karen's campaign of control only ramped up. The morning after her failed accusation, a fresh email arrived from the HOA. All exterior electrical work on private homes was temporarily suspended pending inspection. The message was riddled with bolded words and legalese, but the sender's address gave it away, Karen herself. It was clear this wasn't a community decision but a solo crusade dressed up as official policy. At first, I was tempted to ignore it. But old habits die hard, and I'd learned by now that ignoring Karen was like ignoring a leak. Eventually, it floods everything. That afternoon, a man in khakis and a safety vest showed up at my door. He introduced himself as Ed from the city's electrical inspection office. "Got a work order for a surprise inspection," he said, flipping through his clipboard. "Unusual. Usually these come with a week's notice." I nodded, showing him the recent HOA email. Ed frowned, clearly unimpressed. "We don't answer to HOAs, but someone filed a complaint about unpermitted wiring at this address. Got to check it out." I led him around back, opening the shed and pointing out my outlets, tools, even the perfectly boring fuse box. Ed worked efficiently, snapping photos and jotting notes, pausing once to comment, "Honestly, your setup's cleaner than most." When he finished, he checked the meter one last time and shook his head. "All legal here. But you might want to be careful, whoever keeps sending these reports clearly has it out for you." He didn't have to name names. As Ed left, I noticed Karen watching from behind her curtains, a phone pressed to her ear. It was the same old show, surveillance disguised as concern, escalation whenever her power was threatened. Sure enough, the next HOA email arrived that night. All homeowners must submit current power bills and electrical plans for review. She CC'd the entire block, her message loaded with warnings about ongoing investigations and public safety. Instead of giving in, I decided to get proactive. I wrote a reply, all business, heavy on sarcasm, requesting the official HOA vote and citing the bylaw requiring majority approval for any neighborhood-wide policy. I copied the city inspector and attached Ed's clean bill of health. Within minutes, a handful of neighbors chimed in. Some politely echoed my concerns. Others went further, asking when Karen's own wiring would be inspected, or if the HOA would be refunding the excess dues she'd apparently used for special projects. The group thread snowballed, with neighbors sharing their own grievances, unfair fines, petty rules, endless emails. The next twist arrived just after sunset. A utility truck, unmarked except for a faint city logo, parked at the edge of the cul-de-sac. 2 technicians began tracing cables up and down the block, knocking on doors and politely explaining they were checking for irregularities after a report of grid tampering. My turn came, and I watched as they tested my lines, measured voltage, even checked the junction box. Satisfied, they thanked me for my patience. I asked if this had anything to do with Karen's little adventure, and one tech smiled. You'd be amazed how often these things start with a concerned neighbor. Don't worry, you're not the only stop tonight. The real shock came when the utility team reached Karen's house. She marched outside, demanding to know why they were harassing her. The lead tech explained, in front of several amused neighbors, that they had evidence of a major, ongoing theft of power from her property and needed to inspect her wiring in detail. Karen sputtered and blustered, threatening legal action and media exposure, but the techs remained calm, noting that refusal could result in a court order and hefty fines. With the whole block as an audience, Karen relented and let them in. I lingered on my porch, sipping tea, eavesdropping as best I could. It wasn't long before voices rose. The techs emerged with a trash bag full of illegal wiring and makeshift adapters. Karen's face was flushed, her eyes wild, but she tried to spin the story on the spot, claiming the wires were left by a previous tenant, or maybe were installed without her knowledge by rogue contractors. The utility team didn't buy it for a second. Within the hour, a city official arrived in a separate car, paperwork in hand. He calmly handed Karen a notice. Her electricity would be shut off pending a full investigation, and she was liable for any damages and back fees. I heard her voice, brittle and desperate, pleading that she couldn't be expected to live without power, not even for a night. The official replied, almost apologetically, "You'll have to sort that out with your HOA. Or maybe a hotel." The fallout was immediate. By dawn, word had spread that Karen's house was dark, literally and figuratively. Neighbors who'd spent years ducking her rules now texted me, some emboldened enough to ask how they might organize a recall of the HOA board. Others just wanted advice about wiring and city inspectors. I answered as best I could, walking a tightrope between relishing Karen's downfall and not wanting to become the new lightning rod for neighborhood drama. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. Karen, once untouchable behind her binder of rules and threats, was exposed, her grip on the block slipping as fast as her Wi-Fi signal. But she wasn't finished. She doubled down, sending out furious handwritten letters accusing the entire neighborhood of a coordinated conspiracy and vowing to pursue justice through all available channels. My mailbox filled with threats of further action, each one less coherent than the last. That evening, as I sat outside listening to the hum of my porch light, I watched Karen pacing in her darkened kitchen, a flashlight in one hand, cell phone in the other, her silhouette flickering behind the blinds. She was planning her next move. I could almost hear the wheels turning. Revenge wasn't off the table, not by a long shot. But this time, she was the one fighting uphill. I realized then that this was never about electricity or HOA bylaws. It was about control, about one person's desperate need to hold power over everyone else, no matter the cost. As the first stars winked on overhead, I felt strangely optimistic. For the first time, it seemed the neighborhood was waking up to what life could be like without Karen running the show. And as for me, I was ready. Whatever game she played next, I had learned to play it better. The difference now was that I wasn't playing alone. The following morning, Karen's house was as dark and quiet as a haunted museum, her yard deserted except for a forlorn garden gnome toppled in the flower bed. The entire neighborhood buzzed with new energy, as if a heavy storm had finally broken. Kids biked in circles, grown-ups lingered on sidewalks chatting about everything but HOA business, and for once no one seemed nervous glancing in Karen's direction. Her status had changed overnight from unapproachable tyrant to a cautionary tale, and the transformation had been swift. But as I watched from my porch, coffee warming my hands, I knew better than to count her out. There's a particular brand of tenacity in people who think rules are weapons and reputations are currency. Karen was never going to disappear quietly. Sure enough, by noon, she launched her counteroffensive. It started with the arrival of a battered sedan, rattling to a stop in her driveway. Out stepped a man in a shiny discount suit, carrying a bulging briefcase and squinting at the sun like he hadn't seen daylight in weeks. He shuffled straight to Karen's door. Word spread fast. Within minutes, neighbors peered from behind curtains, and Tim texted me, "She got a lawyer or an exorcist?" I watched as Karen marched outside with the man, papers fluttering, both of them gesturing wildly at the utility pole and her dark windows. After 20 minutes, the lawyer drove off in a cloud of exhaust, leaving Karen fuming on her porch. Not long after, a fresh volley of emails landed in everyone's inbox. Emergency HOA meeting. Community response to false accusations and targeted harassment, the subject blared. The body was pure Karen, pages of grievances, wild claims about sabotage and unprecedented hostility, and a demand that the HOA formally censure me for publicly humiliating a board member. My name appeared no less than 12 times, bolded and underlined, as if repetition could conjure up guilt. At the bottom was a summons. Mandatory meeting in 2 days' time, attendance required under threat of fines. The neighborhood chat exploded. Most people responded with eye-roll emojis, but a few neighbors worried that Karen would find some way to turn the tables. I spent the afternoon preparing, scanning emails, organizing inspection reports, and reviewing the city's findings. Every document was damning for Karen. I made copies of the footage from my security cameras and the utility team's photos. Tim stopped by with homemade cookies and a printout of the HOA bylaws, which we scoured for loopholes Karen might exploit. Together, we planned for every scenario, votes, threats, even a possible ambush of character assassination. As dusk fell, the anxiety I'd felt at Karen's accusations was replaced by a strange sense of anticipation. It was almost exhilarating to be on the offensive, backed by truth and now, finally, the support of my neighbors. That night, I heard Karen in her backyard, her voice sharp and frantic. She was on the phone, pacing so aggressively I half expected her to wear a trench in the grass. Snippets floated over the fence: retaliation, legal grounds, evidence tampering. I realized she was rehearsing for the meeting, stacking her arguments in case the neighborhood dared to stand up to her. What she didn't realize was that the balance had already tipped. People who'd once trembled at her threats were now texting me with advice and even jokes about power-hungry dictatorships. When I got an anonymous tip, sent from a neighbor who signed only as Justice for Shrubbery, that Karen was assembling a list of anti-community troublemakers, I actually laughed out loud. 2 days later, the meeting began in the local elementary school gym. The whole block showed up, from retirees with thermoses to teens in pajamas. There was a tension in the air that reminded me of those moments right before a thunderstorm: expectation, excitement, and the threat of something explosive. Karen arrived fashionably late, striding to the front like a general reviewing her troops. She carried a thick binder under one arm and glared at me with enough venom to curdle milk. Her lawyer followed, stacking legal pads on a folding table and adjusting his tie with nervous little tugs. She opened the meeting by reading a prepared statement, her voice unwavering, painting herself as a victim of organized harassment, targeted by a cabal of rogue homeowners intent on destroying the fabric of the community. She named names, listed alleged offenses, and even cited emotional distress caused by viral internet slander. She demanded restitution, public apologies, and my immediate suspension from all neighborhood activities. The lawyer stood and echoed her points, warning everyone of the legal liabilities associated with online defamation and false reporting. I listened, arms folded, waiting for my turn. The chair recognized me, and I stepped up with my binder, placing it on the table with a quiet confidence I didn't know I had. I addressed the crowd, not Karen, calmly stating the facts. I read the inspection reports, displayed the city's official letters, and played a snippet of my security footage. I reminded everyone that the city, not me, had discovered the illegal connection, and that multiple independent inspections had cleared my property. I even quoted the HOA bylaws. Every action I'd taken had followed the book. As I spoke, I felt the tension shift. People nodded, whispered, even clapped softly. But Karen wasn't done. She cut in, accusing me of manipulating the footage and bribing the inspectors. She claimed the power company was targeting her because of her community leadership. Her voice grew shrill, the words tumbling out faster as she realized the room wasn't with her. Her lawyer, sensing the mood, tried to pivot, suggesting perhaps there had been a misunderstanding, and that maybe the HOA should focus on healing and moving forward. But Karen couldn't let go of her narrative. Then came the final twist. The city inspector, Ed, who happened to live just outside the neighborhood, stood up in the back. He'd come as a private citizen, but when the crowd recognized him, they insisted he speak. He confirmed every detail of my story, noting for the record that the only illegal wiring found was on Karen's property. He praised my cooperation and ended with a quiet warning. The best way to heal is with transparency, not accusations. The room burst into applause, and even some of Karen's allies looked away, embarrassed. When the time came for a vote, first to censure me, then to formally request Karen's resignation as HOA chair, the results were lopsided. No one supported Karen's motion. The motion to request her resignation passed by an overwhelming margin. For the first time, Karen looked truly rattled. She muttered something about lawsuits and stormed from the gym, her lawyer trailing after her. After the meeting, neighbors gathered in little groups, talking in hushed, relieved voices. Some thanked me for standing up to her. Others asked how to keep the HOA accountable in the future. Tim handed me a cookie and said, "You didn't just win. You changed the whole street." For the first time since all this began, I believed him. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wouldn't vanish quietly, not with her pride wounded and her empire crumbling. The battle was over, but the war for peace had just begun. The aftermath of Karen's public downfall was less like a victory parade and more like the slow, collective exhale of a town that survived a tornado, relief, disbelief, and a nagging anxiety about what wreckage might still be hidden under the surface. The HOA was in disarray, scrambling to patch over the chaos left behind. 4 days after the meeting, people checked in on one another, swapping stories about Karen's old vendettas, nervous laughter turning into genuine conversation as everyone tried to adjust to life without their perennial antagonist at the helm. I noticed subtle changes almost immediately. People started working on their yards again, without the shadow of anonymous complaint. Neighbors who had barely exchanged nods in years now stopped to chat at the mailbox, swapping gardening tips and, inevitably, speculating about what Karen might try next. The general consensus was that she wouldn't let go easily, that someone as invested in her own authority would never accept exile from her petty kingdom. Most were wary but hopeful. I was cautious, but I'd learned by now to trust the mood of the street more than my own worries. Then, on a sunny Friday morning, just as I started to believe Karen might actually slink off into HOA history, she proved everyone right. I was in my garage, tinkering with an old bike, when I heard the distinctive thud of something heavy landing on my front step. It was a thick envelope, sealed with a label from a downtown law firm. I felt my stomach knot as I slid it open, half expecting a lawsuit or a restraining order. Inside, I found a packet of papers, official-looking, dense with legalese, all signed by Karen and her new attorney. She was suing me for emotional distress, defamation, and conspiracy to sabotage her reputation and property. The accusations were, to put it generously, a patchwork of fantasy and paranoia. She blamed me for everything from the viral meme to the power company's investigation, claiming I'd orchestrated a campaign to destroy her standing. She wanted damages, a formal apology, and a permanent ban on me ever attending HOA meetings. There were threats of further legal action if I didn't respond within the week. I stood there in my driveway, flipping through the pages, equal parts angry and amused. Karen was the kind of opponent who mistook escalation for strength. Even at her weakest, she'd rather go down swinging than accept the loss. I scanned the documents, then immediately called my own attorney, a friend of Tim's who'd been following the saga with popcorn in hand. He let out a low whistle when I summarized the latest drama. "She's got nothing," he said. "The inspection reports, city findings, and your neighbor's testimony would bury her case before it gets to a judge. But don't ignore it, bullies like this thrive on silence. We'll file a response and counter with harassment and costs." I relayed the news to the neighbors, who rallied around me like I'd just won a championship game. Tim insisted we hold a post-Karen barbecue, partly in celebration and partly as a show of unity. The group chat overflowed with memes and jokes about Karen's final boss form. One neighbor even made t-shirts reading "Conspiring Homeowners Club" in glitter paint. It would have been hilarious if not for the cloud of anxiety hanging over everything. Even stripped of her title, Karen still had ways to make trouble. The lawsuit, frivolous as it was, could tie up my time and energy for months if she pushed it. The next week was a waiting game. My attorney filed a pointed but professional response, attaching copies of every official report, inspection result, and witness statement we'd collected. He CC'd the city inspector, the HOA board, and Karen's lawyer for good measure. He also added a counterclaim for malicious prosecution and harassment, making it clear we weren't afraid to fight back. That night, for the first time in months, I slept deeply, confident I'd finally seized control of the narrative. But Karen, true to form, still had one more card to play. She took to social media, posting rambling screeds about neighborhood conspiracies, fake evidence, and the dangers of mob justice. She accused the new HOA board of being corrupt traitors, and threatened to take her story to the media. It might have been a real threat, if anyone had still been listening. Instead, her posts drew more eye rolls than outrage. The real damage had been done to her credibility, not mine. About a week later, I received a letter from Karen's lawyer. She was dropping the suit. No apology, no explanation, just a terse one-line note, as if the entire ordeal could be undone with the stroke of a pen. I let out a shaky laugh, relief and triumph warring in my chest. I shared the news at the barbecue that weekend, the sense of closure rippling through the crowd like a fresh breeze. As dusk fell and laughter echoed through the yard, I took a quiet walk to the edge of the cul-de-sac, breathing in the peace I'd fought so hard to reclaim. Karen's house was mostly dark now, her car gone for days at a time. No more frantic pacing behind curtains, no more shrill emails, no more threat. For the first time since I'd moved in, I felt a genuine sense of belonging, a neighborhood not bound by fear, but by shared victory. In the months that followed, life found a new rhythm. The HOA board became more transparent, inviting residents to meetings and posting clear records online. We updated our bylaws, added protections against abuse of power, and even started a monthly potluck. The Karen saga became an inside joke, a reminder of how easily power can be twisted, and how important it is to stand together against it. Even the city inspector, Ed, dropped by from time to time, joining us for burgers and stories. There were occasional flare-ups. Someone complained about a noisy rooster, and a mailbox got knocked over by a runaway tricycle, but these were ordinary, human squabbles, handled with a sense of humor and perspective we'd all earned the hard way. As for Karen, she lingered in the periphery, the ghost of authority long since exorcised. Rumor had it she was trying to sell her house, but found no takers willing to pay her price. Some said she was moving in with a sister out of state. Others claimed she was plotting her next HOA takeover elsewhere. I didn't care. She was no longer the center of gravity in our lives. Looking back, I realized that Karen never really cared about electricity, or bylaws, or even the community itself. She cared about control, about being heard, being feared, being obeyed. When she lost that, she lost everything. Her own hands had cut the wires that kept her connected to her kingdom, leaving her alone in the dark. On my porch one quiet evening, as the crickets chirped and porch lights glowed up and down the street, I sipped my coffee and watched the neighborhood settle in for the night. No drama, no threats, just the easy comfort of people who had reclaimed their peace. I couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of it all, that it took a ridiculous, escalating war over stolen electricity to bring out the best in the very people Karen had tried so hard to control. The power she'd wielded so recklessly had finally, fittingly, come back to shock her. And in the end, the only current running through the neighborhood was connection. The kind you can't tap, steal, or control.